Hello, I'm Susan Applin, and I'm one of the co-CEOs at the World Trade Center Institute. And with me is
Eddie Resende, also a co-CEO.
we like doing this part. Welcome. It's been a long 2 years, and we could not be happier to be here in person with all of you. Agile has been a special series for the organization, and we're fortunate today to have with us its visionary founder, Todd Rupert. We could not have the Agile series without you, so thank you. Also like to give a shout out to, we have several board members here tonight or this afternoon, and I want to thank you for joining us today and have you participate in this very important discussion. To kick this off, I'm going to hand over the mic to Eddie to talk about the session today and introduce our host.
Thank you, Susan. So the Agile series, we've launched it, our first Agile ever was back on April 26, 2017. So we're about to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of Agile. And the idea behind it was we were having lunch with Todd and we were saying, how awesome would it be for us to be able to showcase innovation happening all across Maryland, across industry sectors, across companies, and bring in different speakers that can share different perspectives on innovation, on development. And our first ever session was at McCormick, where we got to listen to the McCormick CEO talk about innovation at their company. And since then, we've done Stanley Black & Decker, we've done Lockheed Martin, we've done many other organizations, Pandora. And it's been amazing how the program has evolved over the years. And we started getting into also covering what are some topics, issues that are having a major impact on the world and society. And how can we share some solutions and innovations to try to tackle some of these issues? What are some topics that are top of mind to global CEOs? So over the years, we've looked at things like cybersecurity, sustainability, water scarcity. We looked at a variety of different topics impacting business, society, and we're excited for our session today which is going to be led and moderated by our board member, Bruce McIndoe. Bruce has been involved with the organization for many years. But this session is going to be looking at some mega trends happening around the world and what are companies doing to prepare for it. It's all about operational resilience. And we're really excited to be with all of you today. I would like to acknowledge and thank a couple of individuals who without this would not be possible, this event today. First is Aaron Carr, who is the program manager of Agile. You have probably received some emails from Erin about the program and making sure that you're registered, but she is amazing in so many ways and has helped keep us organized and get everybody to know exactly where to be. And she's a big believer in all of our topics and what we're doing with this series. And the second individual is our partner, our new Vice President of Programs and Fellowship, Astrid Schmidt-King. Astrid joined us about 3 months ago, and before WTCI, she was an executive in residence at Loyola University. She is a trained attorney, has practiced immigration law, business compliance, health policy, both in Baltimore and the DC area. She's a former EDGE Fellow from the Emerging and Developing Global Executives. She's also an ambassador for the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, where we have a few representatives from the organization here tonight. So we are so lucky to have Astrid. She has been spearheading much of our initiatives around Agile, coming up with topics, speakers, and helping to organize this. And we couldn't have asked, Susan and I couldn't have asked for a better partner. So she'll be facilitating the session today and introducing our speakers, and we'll pass it over to Astrid. And one more round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Susan and Eddie and to all of you for being here today. As they mentioned, my name is Astrid Schmidt-King. I'm the new Vice President of Programs and Fellowships, and it's a privilege and honor to be here. And I'm really grateful that we are here together in person. It is our first kind of back in person Agile, our first of a 4-part series. And so I hope you will join us here at this time next month for our second part, more on that later. And thank you to those joining us via live stream. We want to make this accessible to everybody and get our message out, and also showcase those that we have within the region and kind of highlight this important discussion, not just for those in the room. So many thanks. On behalf of everyone at the WTCBI, we have a lot of our team members here today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting us, and thank you for making our mission come to life. We have all come to learn the importance of technology and how it's a real tool for us to communicate. However, in our opinion, there's nothing like being in a room together to have a discussion. So thank you for being here. Agile, as Eddie and Susan mentioned, has always been a space to feature inspiring breakthrough innovations, changing the world. These conversations provide us an opportunity to connect, more importantly, to collaborate with leaders, with executives, and with those emerging in the market. And now more than ever, that collaboration, this platform for learning with and from one another, is critical to navigating our constantly shifting global landscape. Let us prepare together for a successful and prosperous future. Before I get started, let me tell you a little bit about WTCI. Many of you know it and have experienced it firsthand as you are here today, but I want to tell you a little bit more about our mission. Our mission is to empower globally minded leaders from the Mid-Atlantic with ideas and connections to drive not just growth, that's important, but global good. We aim to connect and to inspire these global leaders to strengthen their businesses, and we believe in the power of having a connected community together. Our network is the largest of its kind in the Mid-Atlantic. We have over 5,000 people representing companies small and large, representing those in the private sector, nonprofit, academia, government. And so let me just highlight a couple of ways that you might see yourself getting involved with us. One is through coming to events. I'm trying to remember to do the clicker on time here. So one of us is to come to events like this, right? That's our showcase events. So thank you for being here. Another event you all might have heard of, which is taking place next month, is our Maryland International Business Leadership Awards, where we celebrate the best of our network. On June 14th, we will uplift, honor, celebrate, and connect the powerful women of our region, our network, with our Women Spanning the Globe conference, an annual happening. And earlier this year, we had our State of the Ports address, where experts talked about the economic engines that exist right here in our region and we sometimes overlook, right? The Port of Baltimore and the Thurgood Marshall Baltimore-Washington International Airport. Last month, some of our fellows were at BWI's airports to see the workings and the business of an airport. We often don't stop to think about how it drives business, but how it's a business itself. Aside from events, we have our prestigious fellowships to prepare students and seasoned professionals for their future careers. Our Albrecht Fellowship programs help dozens of high school and college students every year. They gain exposure to different knowledge they wouldn't have been exposed to real life experiences, and to all of you. And that's really important and powerful. Heartfelt thanks to Jim Albrecht, if he is watching, our founder and supporter of the Albrecht Fellowships. These fellowships don't exist without you. These student experiences don't exist without your vision and your support, so thank you. And our Bowie Fellowships program for the leaders who are hoping to take that next step, whether it's C-suite or developing within their company. They're coming to improve their skills, to build their network, to learn with and from their peers. And we call it the EDGE program, the Emerging and Developing Global Executives. So I want to give a special warm welcome to our current cohort of Bowie Fellows who are in the audience today. Over 10 months, these fellows build their network, build their relationships, augment their business skills, and learn directly from top business leaders. So if I can ask our fellows to take a moment to stand so we can recognize those that are here with us today. I would like to give you all a round of applause. I know. For those of you who are live streaming fellows, you're on the screen as well. This was the retreat where our fellows were. So you're here in spirit, and we thank you for being here. As a 2020 fellow myself, I can tell you, I can personally attest to the value of the program, the importance of the program. And I want to give a sincere thanks to Peter Bowie and Barbara Stewart for their vision, for their support of this program. The powerful connections that are made, the conversations, the informal conversations that are had, make this a stronger region and make Baltimore a stronger business community. Finally, WTCI curates programs for nearly 700 international visitors a year who come to Maryland through our International Visitors Leadership Program. That's something we don't talk about sometimes. 700 folks coming to Baltimore through the WTCI programs we create. So from high school students to C-suite to thought leaders to international visitors, WTCI is committed to supporting, developing, and connecting globally minded leaders in the Mid-Atlantic. One of the best ways to get involved is to reach out to us. We want to learn from you and with you, support your business and get you involved. And I'll give some contact information at the end. We also encourage you to join the conversation via social media. You can see here on the slide, our staff and those in our network often post opportunities, their thoughts on what's happening with the world and sharing information. So please join us there as well. Before we get started, I want to add my thanks to the thanks that Susan and Eddie already gave. There's several people and companies that made today possible. Todd, I know they already thanked you. I'm going to second their thanks. Not only chairman of our board, but the visionary founder, as Susan mentioned, of this event. And now more than ever, we can see the interconnected nature of megatrends, of global trends. So thank you for providing the space and place for us to have these important conversations. I also want to thank our platinum, I got a little too excited there. Let's go back. I want to thank our platinum sponsor, RSM. Thank you for being here today. I know Sally's here. Thank you for being here. RSM provides leading insights on business, industry, and market conditions that affect the middle market to help drive confident business decisions. They've created a powerhouse of collaborative innovation for companies looking to capture a competitive edge. And their team brings innovative ideas and tools to each client relationship. And I want to thank our gold sponsor, City Biz List, who's our media partner, McIndoe Risk Advisory. Many thanks to Bruce, who will lead our conversation. MindGrub, Stanley Black & Decker, and Tedco. Thank you all for your generous support, for making today possible, for supporting these important conversations, and for strengthening the Mid-Atlantic business community. So please join me in a round of applause to thank all of our sponsors here today. And last but not least, I want to thank and add my thanks to Susan and Eddie's, to the WTCI team. This takes all little details to pull together. And while I want to thank all of our team and our collective effort, I do want to thank Erin in the back for being cool, calm, collective, competent, and caring in everything she does. So thank you for being a partner. Turning to today. It's no secret we are in uncertain and in changing times. Cybersecurity, climate change are just two of the mega trends that global leaders need to be up to speed on today if they want their businesses to be positioned and successful tomorrow. Geopolitical uncertainties in the evolving workforce must also be top of mind. During our 2022 series, experts from the Mid-Atlantic will dive into these issues and discuss the innovative solutions they're using to navigate this terrain. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Bruce McIndoe, President of McIndoe Risk Advisory, WTCI board member, and a recognized leader in risk, travel, and intelligence. He will kick off the series by framing global megatrends that impact and challenge businesses. Bruce, thank you so much for your expertise in being here. And I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Hundreds of presentations, but over the last couple of years, I'm getting really used to being in my nice, comfy pajama bottoms and my button-down shirt. and I was joking, I was going to ask her, I said, well, it is a hybrid meeting, I should be able to wear that, right? Oh, well. We're gonna talk about megatrends, and let me give you some context here, and I'm gonna walk through these 5 mega threads, and give you a chance to see, oh, I talk loud, but I need to talk to the mic. Is it up now? Roger that. Okay. So this started in my career back in the 90s when I worked in the intelligence community. We called it future forecasting, right? And we would look out at the horizon 20, 30 years and try to figure out what may or may not happen. The thing that I learned from that point is there are alternate futures. There's not one. And how the interplay between these 5 megatrends define ultimately where that future lies, right? And so even today, if you want to talk about kind of an inflection point or a transition point in the world order is happening as we sit here, right? And there's no one in this room, there's no one in the intelligence community, no one on the planet that today can tell you in 1 year, 3 years, what that world order is going to look like. But what we will talk about today are what are some of the possible futures, right? So that you can start to think about this. And when we think about these things, I want to put it in 2 broad domains. One is business. I'm not responsible for political leaders and decision makings at that level, but I am working with businesses in thinking about these long-term trends for 10, 20, 30 years. We're going to talk about some that are almost 80, right? 2100. And say, okay, for your business, what vein do you want to be on? What path do you want to be on so that you don't miss opportunities that present themselves? And the one thing I will tell you that's happened in the last 40 years, and we'll talk about this as we talk about some of these areas, everything I'm talking about is largely accelerating year over year, except since the financial, great financial crisis of 2007-8, globalization is now deglobalization is accelerating. So we'll switch that, and then everything's accelerating. So that's the one domain, right? This business domain. But the other thing that I've learned in this is for every person on the planet. And I, work and I teach at University of Maryland Global Campus and take these ideas because every person that's sitting in this room today, every person that's on this live feed or may look at it in the future, this is your life. This is your future. These are things that you're going to be making decisions about what you're going to do. You're going to be making decisions about your children, and you're going to be thinking about your children's children that may not even exist yet and have a very different context about what this means to you personally. So we're going to talk about these 5 global forces. Okay. Oh, did you break the news to the Bowie fellows? They're going to test after the.
Surprise quiz.
Anyway, so these are the we'll call global forces, the megatrends, right, that will shape what the world looks like in the decades ahead. So these are the 5. And when we walk through these today, we're going to talk about each one and some of the opportunities and challenges that it presents. Unfortunately, the reason that these are here is they force change that can largely get on a positive trajectory or a negative trajectory. And unfortunately, a lot of what we're dealing with now and for the last few decades, much of this is on a negative trajectory, right? So I have a bad reputation in circles that I've been presenting future forecasting for now 35 years as Dr. Doom. Well, I will assure you today, as we start this journey, I will close with reasons for hope.
because after my first kind of year doing this, people would come to me and say, "You've depressed me." Right? So give me something good. So I've added this for the longest time. And so just as you sit and look at some of these challenges and opportunities, at the end, we will pull it together. So the first one we're going to talk about is deglobalization, right? And up until the financial crises, the world was very much in a globalization mindset, right? And you know, for the US, we were chasing, you know, cheaper labor and cheaper production, and you know, whether it was India, China, Vietnam, wherever, Philippines. So, you know, we pushed our supply chains, we pushed out service delivery to the globe and got benefits of that, right? We may have created some issues at home ultimately, but at the end of the day, you know, it worked out pretty well, right? So then as we moved through the financial crisis, then everyone kind of took a step back and said, you know what, this interconnected globe is a little dangerous, right? And so there were basically 4 countries that considered themselves economic rivals, right? China, Russia, EU, and the US. Do those sound familiar today? Right. So they basically all started kind of going back into their world and saying, okay, how do we kind of control our own destiny, right? But it was a kind of a soft power play, right? You know, thinking through that, and we've seen the continual rise of China, and the EU is doing great. But where are we now is with the Ukraine war, right? The Russian war in Ukraine. What's happened? What's happened is those 4 countries that viewed themselves as rivals ended up having a bonding situation, right? You know, it's like, as Deepak Chopra said, you know, great change is preceded by chaos, right? That's what drives great change. And so what happened is the Western world, which largely, if you look at it, are the wealthy Western countries, right? Wealthy democracies, came together, EU, US, and China and Russia. And we had already been talking about this bipolar globe that we were heading to a decade ago, as now is being accelerated, right? Team China, Team West. And that's where we're going to be sitting for a while. But one remark, don't rule out India. Okay? India will be bigger, and India is going to be more productive than any of those other competitors in the next 30 years. That'll be my forecast. And the engine for the globe will not be in the Western Hemisphere. It will not be in Southeast Asia. The engine that's going to drive this world across those megatrends is in Africa. So we're going to be talking about that. So I'm going to have a couple of thought experiments as we do this, because what I want to do is have you start thinking about these things in a practical context, right? So as we're going to talk about the challenges around supply chain, globalization, climate change, resource scarcity, technology, right? It's like, okay, we can onshore stuff, and sure, robotics and stuff can make that happen, or nearshore it, which is how we've been solving it as an intermediate to that, Mexico and elsewhere. But what about our own backyard? What about our own backyard? If we look at a concept of the United Federation of the Americas, North and South America, what do we have here? We have 1 billion plus people, right? We have amazing wealth, amazing innovation, amazing army, you know, to protect us, 2 great oceans. Water is a major issue that we're going to deal with in resource scarcity. Do you realize that over 50% of the fresh water on this planet is handled by 6 countries? 50% of a very scarce resource, as we've seen. The top three, not top three, three of the top 4 countries sit right there: Canada, the US, and Brazil. The #1 water holder on the planet is Brazil. #1. Okay. Continuous growing season across the hemispheres, right? So we have everything we need here: labor arbitrage, natural resources, everything right here. So as we go through this event and we start looking at what is that new world order, one of the things that we have been talking with companies and the government, look at our own backyard. We can solve a lot of our own problems with, immigration or unintended immigration, from South America up to the US. And, if we have jobs and opportunity and economic growth, why would they want to leave Honduras or Brazil or Bolivia? So this is one of those experiments in thinking about future states and future possibilities. Demographics. I'm going to spend my primary chunk of time on demographics, and then we'll talk about the other things. And the reason for that is, I don't care what we're doing. This is the #1 mega trend that businesses, nation states, and you as citizens of the earth should pay attention to and understand. It's what drives fundamentally economic, resource, climate change, everything. If there were no people on this planet, we wouldn't have any problems. If we have lots of people on this planet, we have lots of problems. It's that simple. Okay? And when you have lots of people, they need to survive, right? And they bond together to protect each other. Those used to be village and city nation states, and then nations, and all the evolution that we've had to help provide protection primarily, and then resources sharing for that population. So let's talk about population growth, because this is going to tie into technology. In the history of mankind, is roughly up until about 1800, about 12,000 years. Okay? So in 12,000 years of us populating this planet, and around the early 1800s, we hit 1 billion people in 12,000 years. 1. Okay? And we were going happily along, and we would have just floated along, and maybe in another 30 years, there would have been 1.1 billion. What happened in the early 1800s? We learned how to create steam. That was the first industrial revolution, where we started to create energy by mechanical kinetic energy from heating water and steam. That was the first. And so what did that do? That enabled us to do more farming, build things, and bring people from farms into the cities to work, right? And so when you have animals and you feed them and they have basically unlimited food, what do? What do? They have babies, right? So if you want to talk about, hockey stick growth, so through the first industrial revolution into the second one was what? We got tired of steam and we like, wow, this oil stuff is awesome, right? It burns and it creates a lot of energy, and we can, do that. So the second industrial revolution was a hydrocarbon generated energy, and took us through that kind of 100-year period. And in that 124 years, up until right around 1914, World War I, we added 1 more billion people to the planet. So now we're 2. 33 years later, another billion. And then pretty much since then, through this whole growth phase that we've had, about every 13 to 15 years, we've added another billion people to the planet to where we're approaching 8 billion people on this planet right now. So think about that, from 1800s to today, 7 billion people have been put on this planet. So it's like running a business, you know, it's like, that's really hard to manage. And that's what we're struggling with, right? All the demands and resources and issues that we're dealing with when you have a company with 1 and then all of a sudden it's 8 billion, right? A little more complicated. So that's where we are in that thing. So where are we going is really important. And when you're talking about population growth, the critical number you want to look at is number of live births per woman. Because if you don't hit 2.1 and 0.1 broadly, not in the developing countries, means that's the people that don't make it through the life expectancy, right? So 2 would be the mathematical purist, but then you know people pass away before they get to their the end of their projected life. So right now 2.1 would be replacement. None of the developed world, the rich nations, are even close to 2.1. The United States, even with the immigration that we have and the growth that we have through immigration, 1.7. Europe's roughly in the 1.5. Japan, for a long time, has been sitting at 1.4, now 1.36. What do those numbers mean to you? Okay, people aren't having as much babies. From 1.7 to 1.36, that's 20% below replacement to 35% below replacement. What happens over 1 generation at that birth rate? You have 20 to 35% less people to run your GDP and your economy. Japan, China, us are all going to struggle. We'll look at technology as a potential solution, but right now, if we just project it out, we don't have enough people. We won't have enough people in a generation to do what we're doing today. And we're already struggling because of what doesn't magically become 1.7. It was 1.83 15 years ago. So it's just been this slow burn down where fundamentally for us to run our economy in its current architecture, we need about 2 to 3 million more immigrants in the next 15 years. We need them, not pushing them away, but we need them. We need to bring them in, we need to train them, and we need to make them productive. So that's what's happening with demographics. The other thing that happens with demographics is I want to do one thought experiment around that, and then we'll move through the others. And I'm doing this because we have 2 wonderful panelists here, okay? For a reason. Leslie, it works for a company, Jhpiego, for what, 50 years, right? It's their anniversary. Has been working in developing world, countries with low resources, helping them project a future, focusing largely on health. Because one of the reasons, like for example, in Africa, the birth rate is 4.2. 4.2. But the challenge with that 4.2 is until companies like Jhpiego and others came, many, I'm not going to say the majority, but a significant number of those births did not survive very long, right? So you have this, but what's happening now is they're maturing, as they're building wealth, as they're building, health capacity and other capabilities, those births are going to be around. And when you look at that growth of 2 billion more people in the next 30 years, half of that growth will be in Africa. Half, easily. Okay? So that's that side of the equation. The other side of the equation is Nancy. She represents the techno wizardry, right? With Compass data centers. You're the like basic fuel fire, you know, cow dung and wood, right? But anyway, so we're gonna have a great conversation here in a minute to look at these issues from two different perspectives. And I'll tell you that the low resource in the sense of financial, not natural, countries have an amazing opportunity ahead of them. We'll talk through that in the conversation. But anyway, so here's the thought experiment that is going to lead me to Nancy. If we're going to add 2 to 3 billion more people to this planet, okay, where are they going to live? Right? So right now, the average number of people per housing unit on the planet is about 2.5, okay? And if you look at a region, it ranges from like in Paris and New York City and elsewhere, just barely above 2. If you go down in Africa, it's actually over 5, right? People live per housing unit. So when you look at the forecast, you say, well, as people age, they move into housing units, 1 or 2 people, right? As they get wealthy, they don't have kids, right? And so they tend to be smaller. And as other countries raise in wealth, they want more space. They don't want 5 people per home. They want 3 or 4 or 2, right? So we have more demand in housing. So when you do the calculation, we will add somewhere between 2 and 2.3 billion housing units to the planet in the next 30 years for the 2 billion, 40 years for the 2.3 billion, 2.4 billion, sorry. So that's what we have to do in a pretty short period of time, 30, 40 years. That's essentially my career, right? But I'm going to put another number down. The total housing unit capacity of the planet today. This is the entire history of human mankind to this moment. We have on this planet roughly 2.3 billion housing units over 12,000 years. Does that weigh in your mind that in order for us to accommodate the expected growth that's already in that trajectory, we essentially have to rebuild everything that exists today to accommodate those people in the next 30 to 40 years. Rebuild everything that's on the planet. Okay, and I'm not factoring in loss to climate change, loss to war. We've lost over 120,000 housing units in Ukraine already. Right? Not natural disasters, nothing. This is just people that are going to be on the planet. But okay, that seems pretty daunting, but think about the opportunities that are there, right? In achieving that. Stanley Black & Decker's like, yeah. But these are the things, and the reason I'm trying to do these thought experiments with you is this is why it's important that business step back and do strategic forecasting and think about what do these mean to your business, okay? Now, the UN is saying that come 2100, 78 years from now, that population growth is going to decline. It's going to level off around 11, 12 billion and then decline. I'm telling you today, not happening. Not happening. Based on the Industrial Revolution 1 and 2 and the way that we operate, sure. When technology is injected and people feel good again and they see a future, they're going to make more babies. So without it, that'll happen. Okay. Whoops. Did I go back? Okay. I'm going to do. So climate change. I am not going to spend much time on climate change because if you're not like getting that blasted into your mind every day, then I'm not going to help anymore. What I am going to tell you is what I've told people since 2015 was the first time I said this. And I got heat for it then, and there better be no question now. The time for prevention of climate change is in the rearview mirror. That's over. We are now living with climate change. Okay? The question is, what is that climate change future going to give us? Which comes down to how quickly can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other generators for climate change? How fast can we do that? So I'm going to hold that, put a pin on it, because I'm going to give you climate change optimism as we finish this introduction. On the resource scarcity front, when we look at resource scarcity, for the planet, we focus on 5 critical resources. 5 critical resources that drive human action, that drive migration, that drive conflict and competition. 5. Air, water, food, shelter, fuel. 5. Those are the fundamental drivers for human action. If I don't have air, I die in minutes. But it also means polluted air. I don't want to be in a place that has polluted air. I'm going to move, right? Air. Food. I'm sorry, water. Water. The human body can live without water for 1 to 3 days. 72 hours, you're dead. That's an existential threat to you if you don't have water. You don't have water, you're going to go find it. Nation state boundaries be damned, right? I'm going to go find water. Food, similarly, but I got a 1 to 3 week path on that. Now, maybe some Americans might get 4 weeks, but including me, maybe, but not very long, right? Now, shelter and fuel depends on where you are, right? Closer to the equator, I can deal with less shelter. If I'm in the north, I need not only shelter, but I need fuel for heat, fuel for cooking, those kind of things. So those are the fundamental kind of things that we look at from what drives human behavior. But for a business, you have to go open that aperture, right? Like rare earth metals and things like that that are really critical, and looking at your business and what are the resources that you're consuming and where do they fundamentally come from, and actually look at that future for your business and say, is that sustainable? And that's what we're going to talk about around climate change. So what has happened is that countries now realize that, especially with the pandemic, that kind of national security is driven by access to resources and ultimately the conversion of those resources to usable product. Okay. So when we looked at the pandemic, we didn't have even basic capability to produce masks in the United States for our healthcare system. A lot of the drugs and things that we use are produced in India and elsewhere, right? We didn't even have basic drugs. Now we had stockpiles, but as you saw, under-resourced because they didn't want to spend the money, right? Just like anybody on preparedness. So every country now is figuring out how do they become more resilient, more self-dependent. That's not the right answer. It's not the right answer for your business. To be resilient is to be agile and multidimensional, right? So if I'm using hydrocarbon fuel, but I have solar, wind, or other backup, and I use the full spectrum of that in my business, I can dial up and down those options. If I need certain minerals or certain types of resources, I should be sourcing those from very different geopolitical and geographical locations and not relying on a single supplier. These are fundamental things, but when you look at corporates and look at businesses, and I look at a lot of them, you start going down a couple of tiers in their supply chain and they go, because it all goes back to Well, for rare earth metals, the only people that want to do the dirty work is China, right? They own like, for a lot of the key ones, 90, 97% of the market on some of these rare earth metals, right? That's a real problem. But we have to learn how to deal with it. So these are some of the challenges on the resource side. On the technology side, when I have been dealing with this for a long time now, I've been watching technology, right? I can tell you with 40-year lens, the technology that is being innovated, and not only innovated, but actually are in prototype right now, will make science fiction writers have to like go back to school and figure out what's next. And God forbid that they go back to the Matrix and it's the metaverse. But we already been there. We got to think ahead. So we'll see what they come up with. But what's happening now on the technology front is incredibly amazing. And the opportunities that present itself for business and for solving a lot of the problems that I'm raising here today come from technology, okay? And so one of the key things that I've seen out there is that, and in the parlance now, we had the first industrial revolution, steam. Second industrial revolution was oil. The third one was digitalization and information processing and all that stuff. We're now entering this fourth industrial evolution, which is all about automation, right? Edge sensing, IoTs, and all that stuff. So it's all about hacking the human, right? So we have AI systems now that can create amazing novels, that can take gigabytes of information and distill it down into an amazing article summarizing all of that information and knowledge, right? Today, that exists today. Well, what does that mean? Well, if we have robots that can do amazing automation, and we have AI and machine learning that can do a lot of what a lot of us do, a lot of us aren't going to do it anymore. The projection in the next 15 years, and I think it will be sooner, so I'm going to say 10 to 15 years, between 30 and 45% of job categories that exist today will not exist. Will not exist at all. Think about drivers. We are an inch away from basically taking our highways, putting conductive energy energizers in them so we don't have to haul batteries around, and we can just get inductive charging while they're driving with no person driving, right? Just a vehicle. Whether it's a car, whether it's a mid-sized truck, or whether it's a full truck, will not require drivers. And they're going to segment our roads to say, that's for them, and all you crazy humans that still drive, you're over here. You stay away from them, right? So that's like a whole category of jobs. If you take anything that's repetitive, anything that's algorithmic, bookkeeping, first-tier customer service, we hate it, but it's evolving. In another 5 years, when you call and it says, tell me what you need. I need some help. I don't understand that. We can help you with, it's like, but in 5 years, it's going to be a full conversation with this, automated person, right? That's going to have tremendous knowledge. It's actually going to be able to solve a lot of your questions and answers rather than getting you to the right person. But also in law, in healthcare, doctors. You're going to be able to embody in a frontline GP automatron the cumulative knowledge of medical history to figure out a differential evaluation of you and what's your problem. That's coming. It actually exists, but it will come in scale again in the next 4 to 5 years. So a lot of these kinds of jobs are going to go away. Now, as with ATMs and other things that we've done, new jobs get created in different sectors that support and build these, but they're coming and we have to be prepared as a society to respond to that. And we'll talk about that when we're here. So these are some of the key things. The other one I want to talk about is food, because I said that's like the critical one. Actually, I'll talk about water and food. Water's easy. We have technology now. It's being deployed to California, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Just for a number, 15% of the oil they pull out of the ground, 15% of all that oil they use to create water, desalination, 15%. So it doesn't surprise you that the two geographies that are like in water crisis, California and KSA, that's saying I can make a lot more money selling oil than burning it, are moving to solar desalination at scale. And that's going to go out. So that, you know, on the waterfront. On the food front, we are still producing food, whether it's in the ground or on the hoof, like we did 14,000 years ago. You know, it's completely mind-blowing that with 8 billion people on this planet, we are still have farming practices from the beginning of time. The only thing we're doing is throwing fat fertilizer at it and some mechanized machinery. It's crazy, but it's going to go away. Two things are going to happen. One, hydroponics is on its way. Aeroponics is going to kick its butt. Aeroponics, I get 90% to 95% less water consumption than traditional farming, 30% more yield, 3 times faster growth, and I can stack it up vertically. I can surround a 10 million, 100 million person city, mega city and a giga city, megatropolis, which are coming. And I can produce that food. And when you talk about food to table, right there, right? I can just have these vertical silos generating the food. That's one. The other one is protein. Beyond Meats and all those have already started to show us that plant-based proteins are acceptable to a broad number. But what if I told you I can grow and manufacture a wonderful strip steak and you absolutely cannot tell the difference because it's the same biostructure? That it's now existing. We can now grow protein and we don't have to have it slaughter animals to get it. And if you're going, that's really gross, I'm going to tell you why we can do that. 3D additive printing and bioengineering, because right now, if you get a skin graft in any major hospital, that skin is grown. It's not taken off of your body or someone else's. For virtually all of the filtering organs in your body are already in prototype, printed and inserted with no rejection, manufactured for you. And in the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to be doing, you know, heart and other parts of your body that we can take your DNA, well, not the DNA, but the profile of your body, print that organ to fit and pop it in you. That's where we're going. So if you love liver, we can print you a liver. Not a problem. Okay, so the reason I'm bringing these up is these are big problems, right? Water, food. That's the kind of technology that's out there. All right, so now we get to reasons for hope, and then we're going to have an interesting conversation here. So I talked about water and technology. MIT just had a breakthrough producing a non-mechanical steam engine that can produce electricity. Non-mechanical steam engine. Because when we boiled water and we created steam, we created a flywheel, right? And then that turned essentially a coil that generated electricity, right? And we still have some of that around. But anyway, so what they've done through the metal properties and nanotechnology can actually produce that with about 60% more better efficiency in essentially a little chip. So that's kind of the prototype. But they can already envision scaling this up, where we can actually take these properties and generate electricity without all of the mass that we've lived with in the first industrial revolution. So, and storage, battery technology, fuel cells, all these things, biomass, great stuff. So this is all going on. So these, you know, if you kind of give people a problem, the innovation that we have in this country and world is amazing. And they are solving these problems. They know these problems, they're solving them. And so we have great opportunity there. And the last piece is on climate change is why am I optimistic? I'm even as horrible as the whole Russian war in Ukraine is, that it's going to give us a step function, you know, toward, you know, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, right? So when we looked at 2015 and said we needed to get to 1.5, we were on a projection of about 4%, right? Or 4 degrees of warming. We needed to be at 1.5. Through what's already been accomplished, so we've already made progress now to around 3 degrees centigrade, right? In what I would call weak but energetic, you know, but not cohesive approach, we've already made that kind of progress, right? The pledge right now that came out would get us right down to about 2, and we want to be at 1.5, right? Let me just tell you one thing that we could do, one, and hit that number. One, don't eat meat. Don't eat meat. 15% of greenhouse gas emissions globally generated from livestock, the vast majority of that beef, thank you, the US and other nations. 75% of farmable land is used for livestock, only 25% for everything else that we eat. 15% of greenhouse gas emissions is the same amount as all transportation on the planet. How hard is it to say, I'm going to cut back substantially, or I'm going to do my part from the planet and say, I'm not going to slaughter any more animals? And you know what? Beyond Burger tastes pretty damn good. Thank you. So we're going to talk more today. We'll bring our panelists up and talk about some of these things and get your mind going, get some questions. This is a great opportunity. All right, ladies.
Just a brief intro to our panelists today. Dr. Leslie Mancuso is the president and CEO of Jhpiego, an affiliate, walk away from probably your mics, an affiliate of Johns Hopkins University, a nurse and an American Academy of Nursing Fellow. Dr. Mancuso is recognized international business leader with a track record of success in bringing accountability and navigating changes in the international nonprofit world. She has decades of experience in developing public-private partnerships with organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the US government, GE Foundation, Merck, and Lateral Medical. Dr. Mancuso oversees Jhpiego's longstanding and extensive relationship with international agencies, foreign governments, and ministries of health, nursing, midwifery, and medical schools, professional associations, and local non-governmental organizations. Since arriving at Jhpiego in 2002, the organization's budget has grown tremendously, from 5 million to as high as 400 million. And the number of awards has expanded from 4 to 130 currently active awards. Dr. Mancuso serves on numerous boards, including the Life Science Innovation Forum of the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization and the board of directors of the WTCI. And please welcome Nancy Novak, Chief Innovation Officer at Compass Data
And
Centers.
she does like tech stuff. Okay, next.
With more than 30 years of experience in the construction industry, Nancy brings extensive expertise in oversight and responsibility for profit and loss. In her current role as CIO for Compass Data Centers, her focus is on cutting-edge technology, lean practices, and innovative culture through diversity of thought to add value, improve return on investment, and disrupt the construction industry. She's heavily involved in organizations that lead the way for technological advancement in the construction industry, and she is an advocate for women's leadership. Nancy currently serves on the board of director, vice chair on the National Institute of Building Sciences, BMI Council, as well as the executive sponsor for the Digital Divide on the iMasons Advisory Board. She is also the host of Breaking Glass podcast, which features her dynamic conversations with prominent women in the technology industry. Many thanks to both of you for being here. Many thanks to you, Bruce, for your provocative and thoughtful remarks. And I will leave it to you all for the discussion.
Thank you. So let's see, break glass in my vernacular meant you're in big trouble. Good old fire alarms.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I want to start this conversation first, take a deep breath. This is a lot of information, very broad, and we could have gone hours deep. But what I would like to do is I'm going to start with Leslie and say, okay, you took all this in, you're dealing with this every day. Let's have you talk about the key things that kind of resonate with you and Jhpiego and what you're doing personally and otherwise, and let you have a chance to have a piece. Just what do you feel? What do you think?
Well, first, thank you. I loved your presentation, and I'm not just saying.
Scared?
No, it was really, it brought it all together. I could speak on a lot of the topics, but let me talk about a few of the mega trends that you highlighted. Certainly globalization. Right now I'm living this because of COVID. If there's ever any questions about globalization and what's happening in our world, it's COVID. As I've said to many people, it's not been an equalizer, it's been a magnifier of the inequalities that exist in our world. And having just come back from Mozambique and South Africa a week ago, I can tell you that, when you look at what our countries, we're in 40 countries, low resource, middle income countries, the access to vaccines, the access to prevention strategies, the access to treatments are minimal at best. And, what Jhpiego is all about is really trying to look at believing that everyone, no matter where you live, deserves access to the same healthcare. So whether you're a woman in Ethiopia or a woman in Baltimore, they should have access to cutting edge. So COVID in general has been something that we should be learning every step of the way from COVID. In fact, Jhpiego brought the strategies we've been using with Ebola in Guinea and Liberia, the strategies we learned from Zika and SARS, we brought them back to support the Baltimore Department of Health to help them with COVID, from developing contact tracing, from helping them look at vaccine and demand generation in the community. So I do think it's not just us bringing, there is incredible talent and incredible expertise in the countries in which we work. A predominant number of our countries have been in Africa for 50 years, but we're in Asia, we're in Latin America, but certainly Africa being. So, when I look at what's happening, if we believe and should believe that that globalization and COVID directly affects national security. And if we're looking at stability of countries, if you believe that a healthy family leads to a healthy community, and if you have a healthy community, then you have more productive country, more stability in a country. Without that, obviously, globalization is affected. So, I could go on and on about COVID and the lessons learned, but this should be a wake-up call. And for those of us in Jhpiego, we're doing a lot around global health security. How do we look at these issues? How do we help countries? Right now, we're doing a lot in Africa. How do we help countries look at issues around surveillance, around cross-border communication? You know, yes, health surveillance, cross-border. Yes, I'm all about health. You know, and so it's all those issues that we should be learning from each other and crossing. So that's, you know, again, could go through a lot about the COVID lessons
But
learned.
let's look at two things. Let's look at
Yeah.
because this, I think this, I'm trying to draw this to business, right?
Yes.
So, one of the things that has been for the humankind,
Yes.
when you put them in a low resource environment, do they give up? No, they
No.
innovate,
That's correct.
right? And so we have in our developed countries,
Correct.
great opportunity to learn from countries like India and Africa
right.
and elsewhere that have minimal capability, but still are productive
right.
and produce, right? At a huge less consumption
That's
and
right.
carbon footprint. So that's one. And the other thing that I think, if you can just do one word on malaria vaccine.
There's no doubt that the malaria vaccine is going to make an enormous difference in the world. We're readying ourselves for that. Again, vaccines in general, you know, people have thought about immunizations with children. So a lot of the strategies we have developed over the years are heavily based on the under 5. What we need to be looking at, and we certainly are learning lessons with the adult population with COVID, what we needed to,
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
yeah, what we needed to learn is how we look at that vaccine in the life cycle. It's not just the under 5. And so when the malaria comes out, how do we look at this with adults? How do we look at this with not just the under 5? So there's a lot of preparation
Right,
going
and
on
to
around the
draw
malaria
that
vaccine.
together, so what's like the #1 killer of children in Africa?
Malaria,
Malaria. So so I'm saying is when you think about population growth,
right,
you can say, okay, if we solve this problem,
right.
we're gonna have a lot more people that aren't gonna die, right?
And we are
So
thrilled if this is, you know, we're preparing as we should be.
exactly.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So that's, it gives you a perspective from developing
Right.
world. What are your thoughts?
So first of all, that I'm a little exhausted, but I'm thrilled to hear your presentation because you know, one of the things that really resonated with me when you were going through everything was, you know, the mainstream is so clueless about what's really happening, right? So it is kind of crazy when you think about demographics, which are the most powerful factor that drives every, you know, all supply and demand and needs and resources on the planet. You know,
Conflict.
and you name it. It's mind-boggling because the crystal ball is hard to have. And so if you look at, you know, not just the fact that medical advancements make us live longer, the invention of hearty wheat, you know, added 1 billion people to the planet. And then on top of that, you know, you've got, you know, things like birth control in, you know, the developed countries and just all these factors that can weigh into these demographics. It's fascinating to me. And I do study a lot of this. So I was so happy to hear this being talked about. And I just asked myself, like, why isn't there more awareness around this, right? Because it makes such a big difference. But in my world, all of the things that we went through, you know, sustainability is #1. It's #1 everywhere. And
Why don't
all
you talk about as built? Why don't you
and what's built?
as built? You know, as far as infrastructure, and just draw that to climate change. But go ahead.
It's basically the, you know, the developed world, the rich countries are, you know, we have a crumbling infrastructure. It's like old and needs to be rebuilt. And there's lots of things like climate change and, you know, weather events that are causing problems there, creating more demand. And then you've got the emerging markets or the developing world that are trying to leapfrog ahead of the Western world. And we'll do a very good job of that, actually. And that's one of the things that we have to look at in the construction industry is how to change the way we do business in order to adapt to this. And by the way, like all these technologies that we're talking about, you can, you know, there's always unintended consequences, right? You can like them or not. It's not stopping. None of it's going to stop, right? So, you know, being aware and then being plugged in and how to kind of guide and be a part of those decisions versus, you know, sitting back and saying, I think that's bad. AI is bad, you know, or machine learning is bad, or whatever the situation is. It's happening.
Right.
So being aware of it's important. And I also wanted to point out that, you know, like when you look at what you're calling the fourth, revolution, whether from the industrial revolution, it's the digital transformation of everything. It's the ability to do what we can do in a digital form. And it doesn't matter whether you're an artist or you write literature or you take photography or you play music or you are in the STEM fields. It's all digital now. So, to your point, like the job markets are going to change drastically, and technology is very exponential. So when you see that hockey stick curve, this is where we are right now. We're shooting straight up. So again, being aware of these things is probably the most important thing. And I look at it and I love the fact that you brought up India. I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Years ago, I was on a trip with National Geographic and I love traveling them. And they said, basically, half the world's population is China and India. And the way they look at these two powers is you've got, China's like a tiger and India's like an elephant, both very powerful. One just moves faster than the other, but India is a force to be reckoned with. So I was really happy to hear you talk about
I don't know
that.
if I would characterize India as an elephant.
I love elephants, but
It comes back to that, it's like, great change is preceded by chaos. India is literally chaos in, like orchestrated. It's an amazing society and youthful and innovative and
brilliant.
I agree. I think a lot of our innovations we're working on are coming out of India. Low cost innovations, way to do things differently in maternal child health in all different areas. I think India, has been really driving some of our new ideas.
Absolutely. Anyway, so with that, I'm gonna just do this, so from a 1 to 10 optimism, like 1, the earth is doomed, and 10, it's the, Emerald City. Where's your optimism? 1 to 10.
I'm up on the high side. I'm an optimist, but I would say the technology, to your point, is where we have hope. And I do think that we need to bring the humanities together with the sciences, right? It needs to be closer knit, but I think that there's a lot of hope in technology.
7 to 8, 7.
I'd put it at 8.
What are you?
I'm high too. I have I travel all the time, as you know. It's the technology, it's the expertise, it's the youth. I'm seeing it in Africa. I'm seeing it in Asia, in all parts. This isn't just in the cities. So I'm feeling, I'm in the optimist.
Okay, so I'm pausing at that point. This is a lot to take on.
Yes, Dr. Doom, what's your grade?
Exactly.
I know, I thought he was going to come back to us and say, okay, guys, now I'm going to tell you
guys
what's
guys
wrong
are
with you.
smoking stuff.
Yeah.
No, the bottom line is, we are 3 professionals that are seeped into this in great depth. 3 out of 3 are all optimistic to the future. That's the most important thing that I want to just pause and say, yes, the more you know about the problems, then we can fix them, right? And we have that opportunity. So I just want to pause there. Okay, so next is water.
It crosses paths in everything we do, because as we're about health and about helping a country get its access, make sure that women and their families have access to health. Think about how water impacts our life. You have a clinic in Burkina Faso, dry, unstable now in the north due to a variety of reasons. Midwives go and get water in buckets in order to bring them to the facilities, in order to use those buckets to be able to provide care. That has to change. That is changing. Again, my optimism, there are groups that focus on water and look at water access. But right now, I'm still coming into facilities that have the nurses, the midwives, the women carrying the water. If we want women, we know women bring the GDP in our world. Obviously, they play a vital role. We have to look at these women taking their time to walk down and bringing the water, not just the nurses, midwives, stock, whatever, but also women. We have to look at water as an issue of just that manpower and what they should be doing and what it's taking away. So I look at water in that way. I look at water for certainly its effect on healthcare. Clean water, I think it's Nigeria, 50% of that country does not have access to clean water. Obviously, that in and of itself, and that's a country, and one of our largest country programs. So all of that weighs into all aspects of what we do. And it's something that has to intertwine with it. I can't give access if people aren't able to wash hands. I can't give access if they can't use water in the health facilities. So that weighs and certainly affects directly the health and the access for women and children in the countries in which we live.
Sure. Yep. So let's talk then about another major consumer of water and energy, which are buildings and manufacturing. But
Yep.
you know, if you look at buildings, so why don't you talk a little bit about what we're doing there? And I think actually the #1 consumer for energy are buildings, right?
Yeah, the global greenhouse gas footprint is 40% of it is buildings.
Yeah.
30% of that, give or take, maybe 29% is operating buildings, living in buildings, maintaining buildings. About 11% is actually erecting them and delivering them. So it's huge opportunity here. And data centers are, it's interesting, data centers, the cloud it's just big build. It's not really a cloud, it's big buildings, just so you guys know that. Huge buildings, and they're building them all over the place. And
But they paint a
yeah.
cloud on it.
they paint a cloud. But they're huge buildings. They suck a lot of power, and a lot of them use a lot of water. And there's no stopping in sight. You can just see them building everywhere. And by the way, when the edge comes on, it's going to be 100 times bigger than the cloud. So just brace yourself. And that's what's going to close a lot of the digital divide gap and so forth. But the construction industry, I live in California for many years. So trust me, I've had to do don't flush the toilet, unless, take only one shower a week, and don't water your lawn, because, California is a big desert. And so I've always been very concerned about the water, the consumption of water, and in building and in agriculture, by the way, lots of water gets used. We don't do smart things like build cisterns to collect water and be able to reuse it. There's a lot of reclaimed water programs in different regions where they care about it. Our particular prototypes that we build in our data centers on a global scale are waterless. We don't use any water to cool our facilities. So one of the easy things you can do, like if you're going to build data centers, which by the way are new in construction, the cloud is only 10 years old. It's new. They're just figuring out, these big hyperscalers, how to go build stuff, right? They're learning and failing fast and learning and starting to figure out we don't need to use, tons of water to go cool these facilities. There's lots of different technologies that can be used to do that. And this is what the data center industry, in my opinion, is it's incumbent upon them to drag the construction and built environment into the future by coming up with these technologies and making sure that they don't make matters worse and they actually improve that built environment.
Which is one of the huge advantages for especially Africa and India to a large extent. These countries have not invested in infrastructure, right? But if you look at China, China has invested like already, kind of like blown the bank on infrastructure, right? But these two countries haven't. So they have tremendous growth trajectory as they go, and in the case of India, modernize their infrastructure. In the case of Africa is greenfield.
Greenfield.
Greenfield. So when you think about, 1.5 billion people popping up in the sub-Saharan African continent, we have the opportunity to design and build a modern urban infrastructure. And in fact, right now, Laos, Nigeria, will probably be in competition with Beijing. Well, Beijing is really a cluster of cities, but at the end of the day, we'll be in competition as the first cities to exceed 100 million people within an urban architecture.
Right.
But in Africa, as they take that and copy that, because they need to do like 8 more of those, right? It's like, okay, we get to build it right out the gate. We have to like refurbish our crazy infrastructure. They get to start from scratch and do it right for the next millennium, right?
So anyway, so these are some opportunities. How are we going to handle questions? I'd love for people to get an opportunity to add their voice and questions, and don't be shy. Or we'll make Todd say, ask one.
Well, and I wanted to add just
Go ahead.
while you guys are thinking, think of questions. We like questions.
Or comments.
On the infrastructure part, when you were saying like, current state, right?
Mhm.
Think about the Western world, meaning, the rich countries. So there have been new blueprints basically for air travel on the books for decades, right? But if you go and build these new planes that are way more efficient and, by the way, easier
Sustainable fuel.
to load and offload, and also more sustainable, where would you land them? We don't have anywhere to land them because all of our infrastructure is designed around the airplane that was developed 70 years ago. Yeah. So you really have to understand the challenge we have. Now, if you're over in Jordan, as a matter of fact, their whole airport was built in a modular. They brought it in because they don't have the same kind of resources we do from both materials and labor. So and it's a beautiful airport. So, and this is what can happen in these emerging markets where they can think outside the box. Again, so far to really modernize and do things better from a travel standpoint in particular, or any other infrastructure, you have to have that greenfield approach. And we have to go and adapt what we have versus being able to start from scratch.
I would say one of the adaptions is in 2024, late 2024, vertical takeoff, personal transport will be market available. The initial versions will be run about less than 100K, 90K. So basically, you will be able to go out, fire up a quad engine drone that you basically drive and that won't let you crash it because it's basically driver control. So you can just plug in where you want to go. It'll follow the current infrastructure, and already down in Austin, they're testing out the air traffic control for having these vehicles operate within a layer of air over cities. And of course, they'll be used for delivery and other things. But so that technology already exists. Matter of fact, Toyota already has a vehicle, right? And unfortunately, you get to see that at the Olympics. But anyway, so this technology is literally like another COVID year away, i.e. 2 years. And we're going to start seeing these vehicles, and for business, these are going to be driverless vehicles. These are going to be, you plot point A to point B, and it will follow and go where you can now deliver things in a fraction of the time and a fraction of the greenhouse gas consumption, driverless, and have it buzz around and drop things. And so for postal system, for package delivery, for medicine, this technology. So there's a great opportunity, and several 3PL and transport companies are already looking at essentially managing outsourced logistics, much like the UPS, but for this transport, right?
It's true.
Can I say one thing about
Sure.
technology? I don't want everyone to think that just because there is low income countries or middle income countries, that technology isn't in there in a big way. It is. Right now, it's in a different way, perhaps, but AI, we're using it. We're using data in a new way to predict, a labor, and to predict who's going to have complications. We're looking at point of care diagnostics that will be lessons for the developed world, because we're learning how to create those point of care diagnostics, how to create demand, how to make them low cost. And those innovations are being driven in Africa, in Asia, in our countries. So technology is not just the technologies of the developed. The low resource countries are moving quickly, and there's brilliant experts that have these ideas of how to work around and how to make affordable diagnostics that I think and treatments that I think will be used in our country. So I think that I want to make sure people know, there's great technology innovations going on throughout the low resource and middle income countries.
And the mother of invention is necessity, and we can
right.
learn from them. So yes,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Go on, Todd. Yeah, I think for the live stream, they won't be able to hear you. So.
Just comment on that technological advances happening all over the globe. For those of you that don't know, a company that's valued at $1 billion or more is called a unicorn, right? About 6 years ago, there were 52 cities around the world that had at least one unicorn. Today, there are 170. We are living in a sustained global age of innovation led by transformational technological advances that are going to impact every industry in every country. So I'm very positive. The more innovation that can come to allow more people to invest in venture capital, the better off we're going to be. Defined contribution plans, IRAs, we should allow people to invest in venture capital. The more money that's plowed into that, the more innovation we'll have around the globe.
Yeah.
I agree.
And again, just like in an institution, you limit, alternative investments to maybe 5 or 7% of your portfolio, right? So you're not going to risk going off the cliff down the road, but absolutely, it should be a component of that portfolio.
So I just wanted to
Okay.
pick up on what Todd was talking about, this technological phase that we're in, this advancement phase, and have
Fourth industrial revolution.
and have each of you talk about, and maybe specifically Nancy, the digital divide, because this acceleration is happening so fast and these technologies are advancing so fast, but it doesn't necessarily include all the perspectives of all the people in its creation, its recreation.
Yeah.
And where do we find ourselves 15 years, 30 years, 50 years?
Well, so one of my favorite topics, I speak on the digital divide a lot because there are so many layers to it. And I thank you, Susan, for that question. A lot of the innovation that we are dealing with on these new technologies from AI and, doing programming, we really need to focus on getting a diverse set of talent from all over the world to really help us not have the unintended consequences that are bound to happen, right? Or as many of them. But I would say, just think about getting a COVID vaccine and what you had to do to get online and go, sign up and schedule your vaccine and that type of thing. And look at all of the different ways in which, it's kind of like the haves and the have-nots when it comes to the digital divide, right? If you have money and access and education, then you can be digitally literate. You can buy machinery and the proper devices. You can have access that's good, fast, reliable access. So, you're in the have group, right? And a majority of the US is there, right? A lot of the billions of people in the world, as we pointed out, don't have this kind of access. So think of the opportunities that they'd be lacking without that access. So this is, again, trying to connect the world is one thing. Using hard fiber, which is, by the way, everything's connected at this current state, is not sustainable for the future, which is why we are looking at the low orbit satellites to be able to use edge products to provide more access to other regions of the world. But then again, you still have literacy, you still have IT support, you still have equipment and the proper amount of equipment, you have reliability issues, you got all these things to think about, and you have cyber, right? You have being able to keep security. And the next big crisis that they're predicting is going to happen that's very evident is GPS falling over. And I don't think people realize how important GPS is in their daily lives when it comes to the atomic time clock and how transactions take place. So when you really look at this whole technology conundrum, the digital divide is going to be either the larger chasm where we, instead of making the wonderful internet the equalizer, it'll become the divider of people, and so we really have to focus on trying to close that gap, which is why I speak about it.
So, I'll just put on a note on that most people in this room don't probably know that we're pushing about 75,000 satellites into low orbit around the Earth. I believe there's permits for about 130,000 of them. And when this is fully deployed, that any spot on this planet will have ubiquitous access to broadband speed digital communication. Everyone, right? So when you think about always on broadband, none of this getting a Wi-Fi, going to Starbucks or whatever. No, you have it, right? And then all of these centers and edge devices and all the technology will all share this data. Now, can a nation state, build a digital, information firewall? They'll figure out some way to kind of partition that. But at the end of the day, the basic infrastructure will be there for everyone. And so, and again, back to the developing countries, you look at India, you look at Africa, more financial transactions, more currency exchange, more more commerce is done on cell phones.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, it's all done on cell phones.
Right.
When I say more,
Exactly.
all.
You would not
Right.
believe what we do with cell phones.
Yes. And so when you look at that, you say, okay, I have an always on, communication network, and I can conduct everything that I need to conduct in a device that's in the palm of my hand that I can charge with a solar device. Is changing the whole nature of, how we conduct, and this whole, spending thousands of dollars on desktops and laptops and all that stuff is, and the younger generation, it's like, I don't want to send you an email, I'm just going to Slack you or send you a text and deal with it, because that's all we need to talk about, right? And so a lot of what we kind of like are kind of locked and loaded in how we have come to where we are today is not the future that the rest of the world's going to show us how to do it better, faster, cheaper. So, but looking for some questions. Come on. There. Questions and comments too.
How you doing, Bruce? It's nice to see you again.
Good
I worked
seeing
for Bruce
you.
about, I hate to say it, it's about 30 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
But it's been a
You
while.
don't have to say the
Back,
year.
back in those days.
Back in those days, right? So the question is, on one of your slides, you mentioned the word nationalism. And I know you didn't want to talk politics necessarily, but I'm curious as to your all perspectives on the impact of nationalism on innovation. We've had a little bit of a trend of anti-science in this country, and it seemed to be popping up all over the world, even in
Sure.
Scandinavia the last week or so. So just wondering your thoughts on that. And is it just a fad or phase that we're going to blow through, or is it something we have to attend to and address?
100% attend to. Again, when you look at these trends, and when I talked about demographics and resource scarcity, this is what drives human behavior, right? From when we were just small clans pulling together, anyone that was different was dangerous. Anyone that was not part of that was a threat. That's ingrained in us since the dawn of man, right? And so equity and inclusion is kind of like not built into our our structure, but we can learn and understand the value of that. But all people do not move and adjust at the same pace, right? So nationalism is just that at scale.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's really what we're dealing with. One of the challenges that, and this will be a whole separate conversation that we'll probably have when we talk about cybersecurity and all of that, because when we have cryptocurrencies, right, we could actually start devolving into city-state structure again, right? Where I could take, we're talking about, large cities, right? 100 million person city is bigger than probably 2/3 of the nations in the planet, right? At 100 million. I mean, I don't even think the UK has 100 million people, right? So when you start looking at it that way, we could start seeing more fragmentation, but actually more rebuilding those communities that have their own currency, their own protection, their own health, everything that they're doing, and then they're interconnected in kind of a system of systems, a nation of nations, right? where the geographic boundary is less concerned that I've got to protect the Ukrainian borders, because my city can be inclusive. What we're doing today, in my mind, is probably the biggest thing that we can do for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But by having these live feed on the internet, access to this meeting, anybody on this planet, anybody, I don't care if they're in Botswana, India, Pakistan, can watch and
That's great.
participate and be part of this. And so one of the key things that came out of the COVID era, which we're not out of yet, but
Yeah.
that's a whole nother conversation. But the key thing is that companies and meeting producers have now embraced bringing, so that people in India that would have loved to come to Western conferences to learn can now do it, even though it's 2 a.m, but they'll do it, right? So that's, I guess what I would say, but
Yeah,
I'll let you.
Well, what flashed through my mind when you asked that question was all those movies you see with the big asteroids hurling towards Earth, and you're just hoping that, you're not going to rely on just your own country to figure shit out. Like, it'd be nice to unite as a human race. That's all I could think of. So,
I was delayed.
Well, and I'm seeing certainly in Africa, there's a lot of cross-border relationships that are going on. I mean, again, COVID brought them together in some ways, trying to figure out how they learn from each other. I was in South Africa and they said, we kind of helped Mozambique figure out how to, work with
We got in
COVID.
trouble for it.
Yes. And, but, there was that you are seeing it. I will say that they know about the language being used in the United States. So I get a lot of questions when I'm traveling about that, do you only care about the United States or, and I think that's interesting because that's not how they were. There is sharing that's going on.
that is another language, though, is another big one on the
Exactly.
digital divide, right?
Yeah.
Most languages, I mean, there's lots of languages in the world are not represented on the internet. So
That's right.
it's another thing we have to overcome.
Was somebody else?
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
My question was in the same vein there. So I have another question
Sure.
with the increase in demographics, right? People are naturally self-serving, which kind of creates like the technology, the AI that they're going to create is like just inherently going to be self-serving. And
Mhm.
some of that self-serving is misinforming people about things. So like, how do we double the population or increase by this, but also potentially decrease the ramp on misinformation, which again will help continue that growth, right? Right now, it's self-serving things could hamper that growth because
Sure.
we care about ourselves too much.
Mhm.
And how do we convince people that all this stuff is A, real, and B, important to kind of spread it out a little bit more?
So, yeah, so I'm going to take this to identity and information validation, right? I think that's what you're focused on, right? Identity is the whole metaverse, right? Concept. And just projecting that forward, that I could be sitting here in a virtual, 3D space with all of you sitting here as you look today with your facial expressions, with everything that you're doing, and you do not exist. But in my view of you, you absolutely exist. So if you think about, back when we had the original, video games and they were these pixelated, silly little things, right? And then now if you start looking at the gaming and the level of animation and facial expressions of the avatars and what they're projecting there, the next leap to that is essentially deep fake of you that is that, right? So I'm going to model you in that virtual space and interact with you like I am today, everything with precision, and it's quote unquote you. The problem is I can create a digital twin of you and replicate you, and which one's really you? Which one's really representing you? That is being worked on, as far as, the technology and how we're going to say, when I'm working with that representation of you, it absolutely links and represents you. And so I'm independent of what you're telling me or not. That's the first big problem. Because if I can clone you and have you say whatever, now I'm in the world of like, just like misinformation that I can never sort out, right? So those are massive challenges right now that are. On the information piece of this, we're going to move into an environment in the next, I'm going to say 5 years or maybe a little bit more, where basically everything that's put out there can be run through a massive like global knowledge base of like knowledge, because we're going to be building these in all of these domains, whether it's health, law, physics, whatever it might be, and where people are going to be and how this is going to appear is essentially AI decision augmentation for your job, right? So if I'm an accountant, I'm going to have AI augmentation that takes like the knowledge of like, I don't know, 500,000 accountants and all the like nuances of accounting law, and that's now available to me to interact and come to decisions, right? Well, if I have that knowledge, I can start to say, is what I'm saying, is it accurate? So if I say, oh, you don't have to pay your taxes until, June. And the AI is going to look and say, well, wait a minute, no, it's due on April 18th and you missed it. And now you have a penalty of $64 or whatever, So we're going to try to rely on knowledge codification to help us sort out what is knowledge that's truthful, because there's obviously new information that we have no prior knowledge of, but any previous knowledge it'd be like, when I teach, I can run, what's the plagiarism thing?
Oh, yeah, yep.
What's it called?
My daughter uses it.
Check this paper, and I just send it off to a machine, and it comes back and says these four paragraphs were lifted from, not 100% or 98% from this citation.
It's like a truth validation scoring system, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
So that's what I think is going to start to happen, because if we stay on the trajectory of where we are today, where there's no rules, no governance, and no consequence for lying and putting out false information, then we'll crash and burn, and we're not going to.
Yeah. Agreed.
This is the bad road.
Yeah.
Edge fellows.
Yeah.
My question's about,
And be ready for the test.
I know, it's about China. So
Sure.
There's obviously competition when it comes to the megatrends. I think of the African context and how many nations are going into debt to China for China to build their infrastructure. So while there's this great potential growth, well, where's that money actually going to go, right? It might go to China. My question is really about what is our competitive edge, or where are you seeing kind of these major competing arenas globally? One, I work in immigration. So of course we know one of our competitive edges is that people want to come to this country. We are a nation of immigrants. There's not millions.
We need them.
Yeah, exactly. And we need them. There's not millions of people wanting to move to China right now. So that's one for us that we know
And they need them too.
Of course. So just kind of wanted to put that out there and ask your question around, the China, US.
Sure, and I'll just throw out a couple of things. One is per capita wealth is like 8 times here versus China, right? Substantially, more wealth here per capita, right? So that is a huge advantage. What we don't do is we don't use that wealth well. We have 2 problems with wealth. We have income, we have wealth inequality, not even in, where a very small percentage of people in this country own way, like just outrageous amount of wealth, right? And it's not being put toward practical good for the society, right? And so anyway, so that's one key problem, but it is an advantage that we have. And what the Chinese have done through kind of authoritarian top-down command and control is that we're actually going to take the wealth that we've extracted from all these great developing countries, right? And we're actually going to use that to build tentacles out into the world because we need access to markets and we need access to resources, right? And there was a Chinese I've worked with in probably 20 years ago now, maybe actually probably 30 with John. But anyway, what he said is, here's what is a challenge, and I won't say the word that he said, but with the US versus China. Take any country and go look at how the US versus China integrates with that country. What you do is you clear land and you put a fence up and you put a military base. What we do is we go in and build Chinatown and become ingrained in the economics and prosperity of that country. They don't like you, they kick you out. Us, they love us, right? That's the different mentality that they have. It's like this, we want to become part, the whole Belt and Road, right? It has all kinds of problems and challenges and everything. But at the end of the day, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to build that linkage and interconnectedness so that they can participate in the economies for the country and for themselves. So that just gives you some perspective, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, you mentioned Africa. There's no doubt that a lot of investment's gone in. But at the same time, when you talk to the governments or when you're out there and talking to the people, they recognize that, you know, the United States is willing to bring in and work with them on innovations and create new innovations together. Bring in technical expertise so that they become the technical experts and work with them to build what they want in their own country. So I think, you know, I don't think we should sell ourselves short. When I talk to the governments, which I do each visit, when I talk to the health workers, when I talk to the people, what they talk about is, you know, the willingness of the people from the United States to come in and work and collaborate and help them succeed and become resilient and become innovators in their own right and help them to, you know, I hope our goal, I mean, we're trying to get rid of colonialism in Africa. We're trying to get rid of, and we're trying to build up the local expertise because there is so much. I think they recognize that that's where we come in. We come in with a frame of reference that's going to help them figure out how to save their own people's lives, how to develop new innovations in healthcare that another country in Africa could benefit from, or in the world, because they're really looking to support countries in the world, not simply in Africa. So that's what I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that my biggest concern about China is, you know, military. It's like that would be the one thing that's kind of the bogey in the geopolitical scene.
I think this is just a basic question back to the population
Those are always
demographics.
the hardest.
I know. The basic one. Give it to him.
You mentioned more people, more problems. You almost quoted BIG.
Same as, you know, one child, five child, same.
But as the birth rate starts to decrease, there aren't enough people to continue keeping up the infrastructure we've built. What's like the sweet spot? Do we want to keep growing the population at this clip, or is a slowdown a good thing?
Yeah, I'm going to put something in your mind that puts some of this in perspective, because it sounds like a gargantuan problem, right? If you take all the people on the planet and you stand them shoulder to shoulder, they will fit within the broad dimensions of the overall city of Los Angeles. Shoulder to shoulder. Every person on this planet, 7.8 billion people. And you can do that calculation, or you can go on the internet. If you actually take that density and move them out to 3 meters square, they'll fit in Texas. Okay. If you use the density of New York City, 27,000 people, the entire world can fit in the state of New York.
So
So we're good.
So we're good.
So my point is that we grew from 1 billion in the early 1800s to where we are today because of 2 cycles of industrial revolution, right? And I would say that as we bring all of this technology, that we will rebuild hope. We'll rebuild that people are like, I want my family in this world. This is an awesome world. And we will continue to grow. But we're going to grow in megatropolis, in hyper urbanized cities that are well planned for people, not just like cobbled together over 200 years, right? But they're actually designed for livability and for sustainability and all the things that we would want. And people are going to propagate and they're going to, expand, and we're going to,
Urban agriculture.
yeah, we have ample opportunity, and these kinds of technologies can sustain that in a way that it can be really awesome.
Yeah.
But right now, today, and I don't blame all the people that are in their, 18 to 40 that are saying, I don't know if I want to bring kids into this world, right? I understand that fully where we sit today, but I know in a decade, you're going to have, or people will have a different perspective.
To close out, I'd like each of you just to share some closing thoughts that you
That's
have
mine, so go ahead.
as you as kind of you reflect on this conversation, things that have been said, things that were missing from the conversation that we might continue the conversation, or just a takeaway that's resonated with you.
Well, again, I said it right from the beginning, Bruce, you're amazing, and you made us think. And as business leaders, you're making us think every step of the way, which I think has been invaluable. I think we could have talked more about urbanization because there is real crisis in urbanization right now. The countries that are growing the most, India, Nigeria, China, but certainly, we're seeing the challenges of urbanization when it comes to access to healthcare. So I do think that urbanization has to be looked at in the immediate, and we know it's only going to get, bigger, and 90% of that growth is going to be in low and middle income countries. So with that, I think that warrants probably, more discussion. I also think we talked about climate. There's no doubt that we're seeing extreme conditions that are happening. I was in Mozambique in the Sofala province, again, been hit horribly with flooding, and they're trying to figure out, alongside everything else they're trying to do health-wise and deal with, challenges in the north. They're also trying to figure out how do they build infrastructure differently, warning systems differently, because the systems are getting stronger and more challenging, and flooding is getting worse. And so we have to be thinking about that, because the facilities that I visited were ones that were down for the last 2 years that we helped, but more importantly, that's 10,000 women and children a month that weren't getting care. So there's a lot of issues when it comes to climate and urbanization. I think we could talk about, but that's about it.
That's a great point. I think the urbanization was a bit of a gap because that is kind of where we're headed for our future cities and global population growth. I would say that the one thing I would want you guys to take away there, well, there's 2 things really. One is focus on diversity, including bringing in immigrants that we so desperately need. We need diversity for innovation. We need diversity in thought and experience and culture and background, and every way you can possibly think about it. Diversity creates better innovation, and gender parity also creates a better global economy. So don't forget those things. And the other thing is, do your job when it comes to the spontaneous awareness that we're trying to bring about. Ripple in the pond, share, inform people, attend these things, and then spread it out. That's where I believe it.
Great. I just want to close. I was reading an article the other week, 2 weeks ago, and I think I sent this to Bruce and Susan and Eddie, but I think it's really timely, so I want to share it with you all. It says, whether the megatrends will affect our society in more positive or negative ways is largely up to us. In order to tap the profound potential within these trends, we must understand the challenges of the future and target them with our actions today. We must shape our future. We must ensure that globalization, digitization, and demographic change strengthen, not weaken, cohesion in our societies. So I hope you take this conversation and we continue the conversation as we go on and have our reception. I want to thank you all so much.
And I'm going to put out that if anybody is really interested in starting to dig into this, the National Intelligence Council every 4 years puts out a future forecast, right? And they've been doing it, I don't know, this 7th, 8th edition, something like that. Anyway, it just came out. So you can go just, put, future forecast, National Intelligence Council, Nick, and it'll come out. It's a great resource that, they talk about, structural forces and possible future worlds and all this kind of stuff. They do have a contested future, right? So kind of the next 20 years is going to be, globally, run into this contested period. But anyway, so great product. And I brought some white papers on agile operational resiliency that talks about resiliency in your business. And I think it's back on the back table there, and happy to hand that out as well.
So before moving on to some information on our next session, please join me in thanking our speakers and panelists and moderator. I know that the conversation is not over. We will continue the Agile series on March 24th, where we'll kind of do a deeper dive, right? So the future of work and the workforce and the workplace. And then we'll continue our Agile conversation in the fall, where we look at cyber insecurity as well as climate change and sustainability. So stay tuned for more details on May 24th. You'll be receiving that information from us. And I just also, for those of you who are new to WTCI, want to point out Jeremy's in the back. Jeremy is our VP of membership. I am here to, be a resource in any way we can support you all. But I just want to thank you all for being here. Enjoy the reception, enjoy each other, enjoy being together. And thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. Thank you. And thank you to those of us who came live stream.